Hi class, in this video we're going to go over some techniques for debugging using the JavaScript console. I'll look at some errors that you might come across, and this week we also have a debugging challenge which you can download and fix the errors to practice debugging. I'm going to go ahead and open up my MMP 210 folder. I'm just going to drag it onto Sublime Text. And I'm going to open up the project that we've been working on this week, which is the sketch of the self-portrait with variables. So I'm going to increase the size there a bit. And we're just going to talk about debugging. I'll make sure my Sublime server is running. Looks good. And I'm going to open up a new incognito window and go to localhost 8080 and open that up. When we're debugging in JavaScript, typically we use the JavaScript console. I can open that up on the Mac by hitting Command-Option-J. On Windows, it would be Control-Shift-J. I can also go into the Chrome menu and go to View, Developer, JavaScript Console. And I can also just right-click, go to Inspect, and then switch over to this Console tab. So the console is a way that we can interact with the JavaScript in our website. There's a lot of stuff that we can use the console for, but it's really for developers. It's not for somebody who's just visiting the website. We can play with the variables, we can log different things, and it also will show us errors if we're having issues. So there's a couple different reasons that we'll use the console, and I'll go over those. First, let's just talk about what debugging is. So the term computer bug was first coined by Grace Hopper. Grace Hopper was a computer programmer. She worked for the United States Navy, as we can see here. And she was one of the first programmers to create a bunch of different languages and come up with different ideas in programming that are still very influential today. One of the terms that she created was based on finding an actual bug in a computer. So back in the day when computers were big physical machines, we can see the first computer bug here where she actually taped a bug that was stuck in an electrical component in the computer into her notebook. The term bug comes from that. It's something that makes the program behave in an unexpected way. In this case, it was a physical bug. In our case, it's typically going to be problems with our software, whether it's a missing letter or a missing symbol or something spelled incorrectly or something else like that. So it's a little bit of the history of the computer bug. There's some basic things to keep in mind when debugging. So sometimes when you run a program, you won't see what you expect to see. And so that's really the first step. So step one, just write this here. So step one. So ask yourself, what did we expect to happen and what happened instead? So that's just kind of framing the issue. So what did we expect and what happened instead? So that's a way of just framing before we say, oh, that's not working, or oh, something's wrong. Think, what did I expect to happen and what am I seeing instead? So we can create a bug really easily just by misspelling any word. So if I said like VIR instead of VAR, we're going to get a bug. And if we didn't have our JavaScript console open, you're going to see, okay, my self-portrait is not loading, and you might think, oh, there's something wrong with this. And so it's important to think, what did I expect to happen and what's not happening? So I expected my self-portrait to be on the page. I'm not seeing it at all. And so that would suggest to me that it's probably a bug. And so what I need to do first is open up the console. So I would go to Inspect and go to Console. And in fact, there we do see a bug. And one of the nice things about the console is it actually tells us exactly where to look to find that bug. It's not always completely accurate because there's some things that it won't be able to figure out on its own, but it usually gives us, kind of points us in the right direction for where to look. So that's a very important place to start. I often have students throughout the semester saying, my website disappeared or nothing's showing up, because they're expecting to see one thing and they're not seeing it, but they're not asking why did that happen. And so it's important to ask, what did I expect to see, and what am I seeing instead? So that's step one. Step two is what we just did, check the console for error message. Sometimes you won't see an error message. So, if we wrote this program correctly, and there it is, but we had a different error, like maybe I forgot to write my script file. Now there's nothing on my page, but there's no error here. Okay, so then I would have to go back and think, what could possibly create a situation where my script doesn't run? And so, one thing that I would do sometimes if I'm doing this is I would use console.log. So console.log is a really easy way to log something in the console. And so if I said console.log, hello, that's not going to run because my program's not attached. So I might say, well, it's not even doing this log statement here. So let me go back to my index page and make sure I have that script. And, I would go and see, okay, the script's not there. So let's make sure that we have the script attached. And if I reload the page, we can see that our log is happening. And now we can see our self-portrait. So console.log is really useful. You can pretty much log anything you want here. So for example, maybe your X value is too big, something like that. And so you're not seeing where your self-portrait is. And maybe you forgot. So you could say, my triangle should be right here. Where's my triangle? Well, I can log X. So I could say console.log and put X in the parentheses. And now we can see over here that X is, way too big. And so then I would say, I forgot I made X way too big. So let's bring that back down. And now we've solved the problem. Step one is to identify which type of problem you're having. Step two is to check for errors in the console. Step three is to test the program using console.log. And then after that, you could do some research. So let's bring back our variable that we had before. So let's say I just forgot the R here. And so then I get this unexpected syntax error, unexpected identifier. Well, I might not know what that means, so I can just Google it. So I'm just going to put that in Google. And here's Stack Overflow is a very good resource for this. That's usually what your first result will be. And when I'm reading this, I'm starting to notice that this doesn't look very familiar. So this is actually for a different platform than what I'm using. So I could be a little more specific by saying, at the beginning I could add JavaScript so it knows what language I'm looking for. Okay, so now I have a JavaScript one. So this looks a little bit more familiar. And I can kind of read through these and see what some of the issues might be. You might not always find exactly what you're looking for, but it might be helpful. Okay, so we can do research using Google. The next step would be just asking a friend to get somebody else to look at it. So this is very useful, especially when you've been working on a program for a long time. Sometimes you start to lose sight of what you're really looking at, and it's very easy to miss small errors. Like if you're missing, just like an R right here, you might have read this a million times and not understand why that's not working. Whereas somebody else might read through here and immediately say, oh, there's no R here. So you're just missing an R, and there we go. So it's always good to ask somebody else to take a look at your code. Obviously, me as the professor, I'm always happy to do that, but other students may be able to help you do that as well. And then the last step, if none of those things work, is just to take a break. If you have an error and you can't figure it out, I don't recommend spending more than 5 or 10 minutes trying to resolve it. Usually it's something, this happens to me all the time. I'll be, working on something and then it won't be working, and I'll spend 6 hours trying to figure out why it doesn't work, and then I'll finally give up. Next day I'll come back and I'll look at it and realize that I just had misspelled something or done something really silly. So a good thing to do is just take a break and refresh and come back to it later. It's very easy to get stuck in this mode where you're obsessed with figuring out why something doesn't work. And that's usually not a good mode to be in when you are trying to solve a problem. So I recommend, just kind of taking a break and coming back to it with a fresh mind. So to go over that again, so step 1 is to ask what was expected. Step 2 is check the console. Okay, step 3 is console.log, some data, some variables or numbers or whatever else might not be working. Step 4 is to do some research on Google or Stack Overflow. Step 5 is ask a friend. Okay, and the last step, step 6, is take a break. Okay, so those are your debugging steps. Pretty straightforward. A couple more things just to mention when it comes to debugging. I'll go over a couple examples. So one big thing is don't delete your code. Okay, it's really bad to delete your code because that way you're going to lose everything that you've been working on and you're not going to learn from the experience. So bugs can be very frustrating and errors can be very frustrating, but they're also a very good teaching tool because you'll learn why did this bug happen and then you'll be able to avoid doing it in the future. So learning from your mistakes is a much more proactive and effective way to address bugs. Another thing to do is just make sure that you're editing the right file. So that's something that I see really often. It's not really a bug because you're just not in the right place. But I see this all the time where, a student will have one copy of their portfolio in one place, and then they'll have another copy of their portfolio in another place, and they're editing one, but it's not changing. Just make sure you have the right folder. So what I do is, it doesn't take very long. I just close Sublime, close Chrome, close everything out, make sure I'm in the right place, and just make sure, I have MMP 210. Go to my Sublime server, make sure that's running, reopen Chrome, and go back to the local host. And just make sure that what you're editing is actually what you're looking at. So, an easy way to test that is just to change something and make sure it's changing. So I could go in here, go to sketch.js, change one of these numbers and reload and verify, okay, that does change the sketch, so I know that I'm at least editing the right files. So editing the right files is very important. And then another thing is that I basically just always have the JavaScript console open. So if I do get an error, I'll see it immediately. I don't have to have something go wrong and then open the console to see what it was. So I just have the console open all the time when I'm working. Okay, so let's look at a couple of common errors that you might run into. Something that you'll see a lot if you're missing like a parentheses or an equals sign is a syntax error. So if I take out this equals sign, I'm going to get a syntax error, unexpected number. And so it's going to give me the line. So if I click on here, it'll show me the line in my code in the sources. Or I can just say sketch.js line 9 and go back to Sublime and see here's line 9. And when it says unexpected number, that means when it got to this number, it's confused because this is not a valid statement. I can't just say X and then space and then a number. So even though it doesn't know what is missing there, it knows that it shouldn't be at the number yet. And so what's really missing is the equals sign. So you'll see that a lot if you are missing, like, for example, a parentheses. It'll say, so this is actually says invalid destructuring assignment because it's confused about what I'm trying to do here. But really, I have a syntax error because I opened a parentheses and then I forgot to close it. If I get rid of this curly bracket, I'll get another unexpected identifier. So I started this function, but I didn't set the curly bracket, so now it's confused. I'll also get it, if I take out a comma, I'll get an uncaught syntax error. So it doesn't understand what's happening here because it thinks if this is an argument, then there should be a parentheses here, but what it's getting is a number. And so that needs to be separated by a comma. So that's a syntax error. It's pretty much if you have a typo or you're missing some operator somewhere. Another error that you'll see is the reference error. So for example, if I try to use a variable that doesn't exist, like if I change face red to face red color or something like that, this is what I'll get is a reference error, and it says face red color is not defined. And so that basically is any time that I try to use a variable that I haven't created. So I can go up here and look at my variables and say, oh wait, this is actually face red, and so I'll just fix that. But anytime you have something that it doesn't recognize, that's when you're going to get that reference error. Another thing that you'll see from time to time is, for example, if I misspelled sketch here, if I spelled it with a C, I'll get this error that says get, and it'll have a file. So this isn't actually an error in my code. It's an error in the browser trying to load this site. So it says file not found. And even though I have that file, I just misspelled it. So I would just go in and fix that. But you'll get that if you have you're missing a CSS page or some other reference. So another error that you may see is nan, which stands for not a number. So if I try to do something like 10 times 10, it's going to give me nan. I'll go over a little bit more about the differences between a string and a number in a couple weeks. But if you see nan, basically what it's telling you is that you're trying to do something with a number that is not a number. So nan stands for not a number. So you won't see that one as often, but that is one that you'll run into from time to time. So just so that you are aware of it. So that's basically everything that we want to cover as far as debugging. There is a little debugging challenge that I created, which you can download in the link in the description. It's just basically a project with a bunch of errors in it, and you can use the console and whatever other tools you want to use in order to do the debugging. So in the end, you should end up with something that looks like this. So it's not going to work. It's not going to look like this, obviously, when you open it up, but you can go through all the errors and figure it out. When you're done with that, so I have the debug folder over here. So when you are done with it, you can just take that debug folder, drop it into your MMP 210 repo. And so then it'll show up here, and just add it there and commit and push, and then just send me a link there. So I'm not going to add mine because I've solved it, but you guys can go ahead and add yours. And then eventually you'll just have the debug link on your GitHub Pages site. So when you are done, you can send it to me. Obviously, if you have any issues as you're working on it, feel free to just let me know, and we can take a look.